Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
It started with a mistake. A stupid, drunken mistake. Valentine's Day, and I thought it was her, my wife, out there on the deck. But it wasn't. And now, everything's shattered. And my best friend's wife and I, caught in a moment that wasn't meant to happen. Peggy, my wife, found out. She swore she'd get even. And now I can't sleep. I can't trust her, can't look into those blue eyes without wondering what she's planning. I didn't mean to destroy us. But that one night, that one mistake, has turned into a nightmare. And it's only getting worse. Kyle Whitley was becoming tipsy. He wasn't completely drunk yet, but he was getting there. That's why he was trying to open the sliding patio door that led out to Paul and Ann's backyard deck. It was a nice deck, very strong. They had only built it a couple of weeks ago. After seeing it earlier in the evening, Kyle thought about making one to replace his back porch too. Paul said it had taken him just 4 weekends to finish it. Kyle tripped over the track of the sliding door. It was February, Valentine's Day. Even in South Texas, the evenings were cool, and he hoped the fresh air might help clear his head. He guessed the party would last at least another couple of hours, which would give him enough time to feel better to drive himself and his wife Peggy home. He held a nearly full glass of Jack and Coke in his right hand, and he didn't want to leave it behind. He couldn't remember why, but he had decided just a few minutes ago that he wanted to keep it. He chuckled at the thought that a past version of himself had made that choice. He wasn't going to waste the drink. That would be a shame, he thought with a smile. Still chuckling, he finally managed to get through the big glass door and even closed it behind him. He walked to the far right corner and leaned on the top of the railing. Kyle enjoyed relaxing there for a bit. After a while, when his back started to hurt, he straightened up, pressed his belly against the railing, and stretched to ease the stiff muscles. The deck was only a couple of feet off the ground, enough to make him feel like he was a little above the landscape, but not so high that he would be scared of falling. He bumped the rail with his belly again, this time a bit harder. It surprised him, and he let out a loud sound. For a moment he felt embarrassed, but the feeling didn't last long because of the alcohol. The breeze quickly blew the awkwardness away. He leaned back against the railing and stretched his arms above his head. He vaguely sensed a hand passing through the vertical supports, but he didn't think much of it. He would have to think about it later, but right now, thinking was tough. Suddenly, he noticed someone close to him acting a bit strangely, and it took him a moment to realize what was happening. He tried to move, but felt uncomfortable and slow. Finally, he stepped away from the railing, startled and confused by the unexpected situation. Almost immediately, he felt something that puzzled him. He wasn't sure what it was, but it felt very out of place. He pulled away quickly, realizing it wasn't what he had expected. Kyle shook his head, trying to think clearly, but it was tough because he had been drinking. Anne was late. It was just 10 minutes, but to Kyle it felt like a long time. He sat in the cafe, tapping his fingers on the table, worried she might not come. After meeting in secret for weeks, the weight of their situation was becoming heavy. They both knew they would need to face the truth eventually. Their light conversations felt empty, and finally, they could not avoid the serious topic anymore. "Anne," Kyle said softly, "we need to tell them. We can't keep this a secret. It's not fair to anyone. If they find out on their own, it will only make things worse." He stared into his coffee cup, wishing it could give him answers about what had happened between him and his best friend's wife. "I know," Anne replied, her voice shaking. "I feel guilty all the time, and I think Paul sees it. I can hardly look him in the eyes." Kyle understood. He felt the same when he was with his wife, Peggy. He shook his head. "There's no reason to feel guilty, Anne," he said, a little more firmly than he meant to. "We didn't mean for this to happen. It's not anyone's fault." Tears began to spill down Anne's cheeks. She tried to stop them with a tissue. "I just can't stand the thought of hurting Paul," she said. Kyle gently took her wrists in his hands and pressed them together on the table. "Listen," he said softly. "He'll be hurt even more if we don't tell him. Eventually, he and Peggy will suspect something is wrong, and then it will look like we were hiding the truth. You know that. he added with a reassuring tone. "We have to do this and hope they can understand. It's the only way." He let go of her wrists and gave her hands a gentle pat. This small touch seemed to help her feel a bit stronger. Anne sat up straighter and agreed with a nod. She bit her lips for a moment, took a deep breath, and then looked at him with a smile. But suddenly, she became pale. "Paul!" she shouted. Kyle turned to see his friend standing close to him. He and Anne had been so focused on their conversation that they hadn't noticed Paul walk into the cafe. Kyle examined Paul closely. He didn't look well. He was dressed casually but seemed a bit disheveled and worried. Kyle thought his skin looked pale, just like Anne's did. Now they had no choice but to tell her husband what had happened. "Anne, please, I need to know what's going on," Paul said, his voice shaky and filled with worry. Anne cried, her tears flowing freely. She reached out her arms to Paul, asking him to come closer. He sat down next to her on the bench. He held her tightly as she buried her face in his shoulder, whispering soft, comforting words into her hair. After a while, Anne was able to calm down and sit up straight. Kyle sat quietly, looking down at the table to give his friends some privacy. To keep himself busy, he started organizing a stack of flyers. Paul watched him with growing irritation, but before he could say anything, the flyer in front of him caught his eye. "My birthday? Is that what this is about? You're planning a surprise party for me?" he asked, puzzled. His face lit up with happiness, but then fell again when Kyle shook his head. Kyle looked at Anne, urging her to find the strength to speak about what was coming next. "Well, yes, but that's not the only reason we've been meeting a lot," Kyle said. "Anne, we need to tell him," he added gently. Anne nodded, taking a deep breath. Kyle then turned his attention to Paul. "Paul," Kyle began, speaking slowly, "there's something we need to share that might be hard to hear. I'm not sure how to say it, so just bear with us, okay? Let Anne and me speak, and then you can respond however you need to." Paul looked at him suspiciously, but nodded. Kyle took a deep breath, held it for a moment, then exhaled and began to explain. "That's all there is to it?" Paul asked sharply, his voice filled with impatience. He looked at Anne, who nodded in agreement. "So you and Kyle had a misunderstanding at the Valentine's Day party? How does that even happen?" "It was dark, honey," Anne said gently. She was repeating things she had already told him, but it was crucial for him to understand. "I heard a sound that reminded me of you after having a drink, and I didn't stop to think it might be someone else. It wasn't until Kyle called me by a different name that I understood, and I stopped right away." "So this whole situation began with a sound? That's what you're saying?" Paul asked sarcastically, his voice strained. Anne looked into his eyes and saw something there that made her take action. She lightly tapped him on the ribs. "Come on, Paul Anderson," she said firmly. "This isn't a joke." Paul managed a small smile despite the situation. Relief quickly filled the room as she and Kyle began to smile, and soon all three of them were sharing light laughter. It took a few moments before they could fully calm down. Paul? I really am sorry this happened," Kyle said sincerely. "I wish it hadn't happened, but Anne, Paul waved his hand dismissively. "I know you didn't mean for this to happen," Paul said. "I can see it on your faces. Besides, I know Anne has been with others," he added carefully. "She was divorced when I met her," he continued. "I'm not really upset about the situation, but I am frustrated about the stress you two have caused me in the last 2 weeks." Kyle and Anne exchanged looks of regret. "If you had just come to me sooner," Paul said, "I wouldn't have lost so much sleep, and I wouldn't be so stressed. Why didn't you just tell me?" He looked back and forth between them, and Kyle seemed uncomfortable. "Peggy," he said quietly, "if we tell you, we also have to tell Peggy." "Oh," Paul replied. The three of them glanced at each other, worried. It wasn't that Peggy Whitley was a bad person. In fact, she was the first to help a child in the neighborhood who got hurt and would often bring soup to anyone who was sick. She was generous with community charity events as well. It wasn't about that. It was just that her mother was one of the early feminists. Kyle often wondered how that belief fit alongside the day-to-day realities of a long marriage to a successful man. They had 5 children, too, and he didn't see how that all aligned with Denise's views. In the early days of his marriage, Kyle had bravely asked his father-in-law, Dan, about it. Dan honestly replied that he often overlooked Denise's comments on women's rights. He shared that he let his wife manage home life, giving her respect while staying mostly quiet. In addition, he mentioned they worked out compromises, or Denise would reconsider her opinions. Kyle found this impressive. He also wondered if Denise recognized the irony in her husband's way of handling her views, or if it mattered to her at all. At family gatherings, Denise sometimes made negative comments about men, especially aimed at Kyle. Dan would step in directly, telling her those comments were not appropriate and needed to stop. Denise's face would change, as if she was thinking about what was said or reevaluating how she should act. Each time, she would apologize to Kyle, and the moment would pass. Anyway, Peggy had inherited from her mother an attitude that sometimes showed little patience for men's faults. Their marriage lasted even as it brought challenges, especially with two wonderful children in the mix. Yet, she often found her way back to the kind and loving person she was when they first tied the knot. Recently, however, it took them longer to settle their differences. She had a very competitive spirit. For example, even though she was small, it upset her when Kyle could easily twist off a jar lid that she had struggled to open all day. She did not accept any differences between herself as a woman and Kyle as a man. This sometimes meant she had to sit through sports events she didn't care for, while Kyle had to bear with the movies she picked when the mood struck her. The last time she had chosen a movie, Kyle couldn't hide his boredom and soon fell asleep. His snoring made it hard for her to keep watching, so she woke him up. After a few tense comments, she went to bed, telling him he could stay on the couch. Comfortable where he was, Kyle nodded off again before she made it upstairs. She reminded him of that evening for some time, but she never made him watch the movie again. At times, her views led to bigger arguments. Once, Kyle caught her in a small lie about where she had been when someone dented their car. She said she was at the supermarket, but she had really been at the mall. They could not afford for her to buy the dress, but she worried it would be gone if she didn't get it right away. She went back for it despite telling Kyle she wouldn't. Kyle had suspicions. Something felt off when she talked about the supermarket parking lot, but he couldn't quite figure it out. When the police report for their insurance claim did not match her story, Kyle asked her some straightforward questions. He was not ready for the flood of answers that followed. When he got upset about being treated unfairly and responded sharply, Peggy stopped talking to him for 2 weeks. Even though she wasn't speaking, Kyle began to make comments about the situation that popped into his mind. For example, he pointed out that she wouldn't have had the accident if she hadn't done something she promised not to do. She didn't give him any response. Peggy had decided to stay quiet a little longer, and her silence was still in place. It frustrated her that she couldn't argue back with his logic, which made her even angrier. When Kyle talked to Peggy about her earlier comments, he found himself getting the silent treatment for another 2 weeks. Peggy had returned the dress, but Kyle decided to lay away the payment and buy it for her when things settled down. For 2 months, he ate plain sandwiches at lunchtime to save money for it, believing it would help mend things between them. He thought it would be a nice surprise, but Peggy was upset instead. She didn't want him to buy it. She wanted to do it herself. So the dress ended up unworn and hidden away in her closet. Even though they usually got along, there were times when things became tense, which bothered Kyle. He loved Peggy and dreamed of a future together, but there were moments when her actions frustrated him. They had broken up twice, spending 3 weeks apart the first time and 2 months apart the second time. The second time was tough for Peggy because she had to admit she was wrong about a credit card charge. She accused Kyle of buying something for someone else. When the statement came, it turned out it was actually for a gift for her sister's birthday, and flowers sent from both of them. She just forgot about it. This happened a few months after Todd was born, and things had been calm since then. Kyle hesitated to talk to her about their recent argument, not because he thought badly of Peggy, but because she often didn't give him the benefit of the doubt. They had tried to put off the conversation for as long as they could. "Peggy," Kyle said softly, "Anne and I need to discuss something that happened at the Valentine's Day party." He was sitting next to Peggy on the couch while Anne was in the recliner. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away as she often did. "What is it, honey?" Peggy asked kindly. "It's not about the party for Paul, is it?" Kyle shook his head, trying to hold back his frustration as Peggy looked away. He had already said it was about the February party, but she seemed to ignore that. His jaw tightened. He wanted to approach the conversation carefully, but lingering feelings from the past weeks made it hard to get the words out. It shouldn't be this hard to talk about a mistake. He wanted her to trust him enough to listen. But instead, "Would you like me to refill your coffee?" Peggy asked Anne. Anne placed her hand over her nearly full cup. "No thanks, but I'm good," Anne replied, looking at Kyle with curiosity. "Do you want to go first, Kyle?" she suggested. "You went first with Paul," she added. Peggy glanced between them, suspicion appearing on her face. "What is this about?" she asked cautiously. "Kyle, what did you do?" The doubt was clear in her voice. Kyle shook his head at Anne's suggestion and looked directly at Peggy. Anne and I, we made a mistake at the Valentine's Day party," he said, his voice shaky. He took a deep breath, wet his lips nervously, and tried again. Peggy's eyes narrowed as he quickly explained how he had gone out to the back deck at Anne and Paul's house while Peggy was outside. He shared how he had encountered the railing, leading to a rather awkward situation. Afterward, Peggy walked Anne to the front door, thanking her for talking with her. She smiled, but her warmth was only directed at Anne. She avoided looking at Kyle. Once the door closed behind Anne, Peggy turned around. She raised her hand, startling Kyle, who stepped back without meaning to. His sudden movement made her uneasy, and she rubbed her hand. "You're sorry for this!" she shouted. "Do you think you can let that girl get away with it? You have another thing coming!" Kyle looked at her in shock. He had seen Peggy angry before, but this was different. Her words and actions amazed him. He felt he had reached his limit. "Shut up!" he yelled. The power of his voice quieted her, and Peggy's anger lessened for a moment. Her face was still red with frustration. "Don't you tell me!" she started, but Kyle pointed toward the hallway. Their children, 5-year-old Megan and 3-year-old Todd, were watching with tears in their eyes as their parents fought. Peggy turned to them, quickly softening her face to show she was a caring mother, while still giving Kyle a stern look. It was not okay, and Kyle knew it. A wave of sickness hit him, and he felt a chill in his stomach. He realized something important had broken that day. It had been building for some time, but he had hoped that with effort, they could fix things. Now, he sensed their marriage was in serious trouble. He turned away from Peggy's frown and went into the kitchen for a bottle of water to calm his dry throat. "I'm going to get even, you know," Peggy said calmly, leaning towards Kyle while they sat at the kitchen table. He was having another cup of coffee and flipping through the new ESPN magazine. He had started bringing something to read during dinner to fill the awkward silence that had filled their talk since her big outburst. "What?" Kyle replied sharply. It was the first time in 3 weeks Peggy had spoken to him directly without needing to. He wasn't prepared for her to break her silence and had no response ready. "I'm going to get even with you for what happened with Anne," she said, her eyes shining with determination. "Did you think I would just let it go?" "Peggy," Kyle said tiredly, "it wasn't on purpose. When Anne and I realized what was happening, we stopped quickly. I've told you it was a mistake, but mistakes happen. Anne and Paul have both told you that. Everyone involved except you understands that. Don't you think it's time to move on?" "No way, you horrible person," Peggy shot back. "You had your fun. Now I'm going to enjoy myself," she hissed. Kyle shook his head, feeling hopeless in trying to explain to his wife that he never meant to cause issues with his best friend's wife. "That's very mature of you," he said, sounding sarcastic. Peggy narrowed her eyes, her hands twisting in her lap as she showed her feelings. Her red cheeks displayed her anger, which was always close to the surface these days. "How could you?" she whispered through clenched teeth. "I will get my own back. No matter what you say, I know you were looking for something different that night. You will regret it, Kyle Whitley. You will regret it." Kyle looked at his wife for a long moment before speaking. "Peggy," he said slowly, almost gently, "would you go with me to counseling? Maybe we can work this out with a professional's help. Would you go?" Peggy shook her head before he finished speaking, but he continued, knowing he had to make the offer. "No way," she said sharply. "There's nothing I need to say to someone you probably have set up to convince me I'm wrong and you're right." "You can find the counselor then," Kyle suggested. "Choose anyone you want. I'll go with you, anywhere, anytime," he promised. Her head shook in refusal. Kyle realized he had little hope left. "Fine," he said firmly. "Whatever," he added. "Maybe you can get some help on your own," he suggested. "If you don't find a way to manage that anger, you'll really hurt yourself." Kyle returned to his magazine after a moment. Peggy, her face bright red with anger, stared at him coldly before standing up and leaving the room. Kyle shook his head as he lowered the magazine to watch her go. The connection between Kyle and Peggy had been fragile since the day he and Anne admitted their mistake to her. There had been no loving moments, no kind words exchanged, and only a few instances of normal politeness. Kyle felt alone with his feelings, not wanting to pressure Peggy. Strangely, things started to get better a few days later after Kyle brought up counseling. Dinner that Thursday night was much more cheerful than it had been in weeks. Peggy was lively, sharing news from her work and about Mandy and her husband Bill. They were part of a group of couples who met every few weeks for get-togethers. Peggy knew Mandy from work, as their desks were close to each other. Older than the rest of the group by a couple of decades, Mandy and Bill never seemed older than their friends. They had just found out they were going to be grandparents again. Peggy wondered excitedly if the baby would be a girl this time. Kyle watched her move around the kitchen, amazed by how her mood had changed since breakfast. After putting the kids to bed, Kyle and Peggy settled on the couch to watch the latest episode of American Idol. Kyle wasn't sure why things felt different, but he was happy to go along with it. Their past arguments had drained both of them, so maybe this new upbeat mood was good for Peggy. When the show ended, Peggy smiled into his eyes and leaned closer, looking genuinely sorry. "I'm sorry, honey," she said softly. "I haven't been myself lately, and I see how I've acted." Kyle was surprised. This was a nice change. "Well, maybe we both have a part to play in this," he replied. "I'm sorry, too." They shared a moment that felt warm, something he had missed for a while. "I know," she said quietly. "But if I hadn't been so closed off about what happened with you and Anne, we could have enjoyed this news all month." She laughed lightly, brightening the mood even more. It filled Kyle with a sense of hope. He said playfully into her ear. Kyle and Peggy enjoyed a quiet moment together. They shared a soft kiss, filled with playfulness. They giggled as they headed upstairs, the atmosphere light and loving. Once they reached the bedroom, they continued to express their feelings, enjoying each other's company in a comfortable silence. Kyle felt the warmth of their closeness and locked the bedroom door for privacy. Peggy sat on the bed, smiling at him, feeling happy to be together. They hugged lovingly, their bond strong and tender. As they lay down together, they felt a peaceful closeness, their love for each other reaffirmed. She was full of energy and continued moving with excitement, while Kyle, touched by the moment, let her take the lead. The connection between them was undeniable, and they both felt relief from the stress they had held for a long time. "Did you?" Peggy asked, breathless after a while. Kyle, grinning, shook his head. He liked to take his time and enjoy the moment. Peggy smiled back, clearly happy but wanting more. They relaxed in silence for a while, feeling close without needing to say anything. Peggy sat on the edge of the bed, looking up at Kyle with a smile. Their eyes met with warmth, and they shared a soft, playful moment. She took his hand, and they moved toward the bed together. They hugged, feeling close, filled with love and warmth. As they lay down, they enjoyed being together, finding comfort in their connection. Their love was clear in the way they held each other, their hearts linked. His eyes opened wide in the dark. The last time Peggy had changed her mind so suddenly was a year and a half after they got married. She had wanted that blue dress so much even though they could not afford it. She had said it would not be right for her to buy it. He closed his eyes, feeling tired. Nothing had changed. Peggy had just changed her approach. The worry he had seen in her eyes a few days ago was still there, simmering. She had just hidden it a little to surprise him, and maybe the stress of their situation had affected her too. He was so tired. He slept. But when he woke, he did not feel rested. He could not let this weigh on his mind. He was not one for arguments, but he was honest. "Are you going shopping at the mall today?" Kyle asked his wife with a hint of sarcasm. Peggy was about to open the front door. It was 7:30, and she would just make it to work on time if traffic was not too heavy. "Well, no, I hadn't planned on it," she replied. "Why? Do you need something?" She looked at Kyle with curiosity. He took a bite of the toaster pastry and swallowed before answering. "No, I was just thinking about something," Kyle said. "The last time you said you wouldn't do something because it was the wrong thing to do, you had a little accident in the parking lot at the mall." Peggy frowned for a moment, then her jaw tightened. Anger filled her eyes as she realized what he meant. She stayed quiet for a long moment, letting out a deep breath. Kyle could see in her eyes that all her hard work over the past few days had fallen apart. "Payback is coming, Kyle Aaron Whitley," she said quietly. The calm tone made her anger even more intense. "I will get back at you for what happened. Remember that. I will find a way to feel better before I move on." With that, Peggy opened the door and quickly stepped outside, shutting the door firmly behind her. Kyle stood silently, watching the door, feeling a strong sense of worry. Peggy would not let this go. She would not forgive. She would not agree to separate for a bit to breathe. She had already turned down counseling and was focused on getting back at him for what she saw as his mistake. He did not know how to encourage her to forgive and let this go. He just didn't know. Things got better, but very slowly. There was not much warmth between them, but Kyle and Peggy found ways to be kinder to each other. They could not completely hide the tension. Their 3-year-old son, Todd, started wetting the bed again, and both parents thought it was due to the stress Todd could sense but not fully understand between them. Kyle and Peggy found ways to work together and seem happy in front of their kids. They kept their arguments quieter and behind closed doors. Todd's accidents lessened but did not go away, nor did the disagreement over the Valentine's Day issue that Peggy firmly said was Kyle's fault. Chapter 2. Megan saw an advertisement on TV. She wasn't sure what it was for, but she was really interested in the little boy in the story. He heard his dad saying he would miss seeing his face while he was away. To cheer him up, the boy gathered every picture of himself he could find to pack in his dad's suitcase so his dad would see them when he got to his hotel. Megan thought that was a wonderful idea. When Kyle found her, Megan had 2 photo albums filled with pictures of her and her little brother ready to put in one of their mother's suitcases. She also had a dozen framed pictures of the 2 of them. Kyle smiled, knowing what Megan was trying to do. He told her it was a great idea, but all those pictures might be too heavy for their mom to carry. Megan understood that heavy meant it might be difficult for her. Being a small girl, she found most things a bit too heavy, so she quickly decided against taking all the photos. Instead, they chose 1 framed picture of each child. Kyle held the one of Todd as he reopened one of Peggy's bags. Megan asked if her picture could go into the larger suitcase that was already packed on the bed. Kyle thought that was a good idea, even though he would have preferred to put them both in one suitcase. He unzipped both bags so the photos could fit in. He moved some clothes around to make a soft spot for the photos. While he was arranging things, he noticed something. He looked closely and saw that Peggy's suitcase was filled with her delicate nightgowns, all neatly folded and organized. There was also a big pile of different undergarments and a variety of small purses filling the suitcase. Curious, he opened the garment bag hanging on the closet door and found 3 fancy dresses and some business outfits. In the small travel case, he discovered all of Peggy's makeup and her jewelry box with her favorite necklace, which she hardly ever wore. He thought the string of pearls would look beautiful against her tanned neck. There was a small plastic bag tucked into one corner of the jewelry case. "Mommy, Mommy, come and see what I did!" Megan called out as she ran downstairs. "I put my and Todd's pictures in your suitcase," she announced with pride. Kyle heard her voice all the way from upstairs. He stood up and walked over to the chest of drawers. An easy chair sat against the wall nearby, and he took a seat, waiting for his wife to come in. He could hear Peggy scolding Megan for touching her luggage, and her tone sounded worried. When Peggy entered the bedroom, she didn't notice Kyle at first. He stayed still and hidden behind the bulk of the chest of drawers. Her voice changed to a softer tone when she realized her husband wasn't beside the open suitcase. "Can you explain this, Peggy?" Kyle asked quietly. Peggy jumped a bit at his voice and turned to look at him as he stood up. Her face showed concern, and a hint of guilt crossed her features. "Explain what?" she replied, trying to buy time. Kyle felt frustrated but noticed Megan right by the door. He chose not to respond immediately. Instead, he moved Megan's picture, placing it carefully among Peggy's neatly folded nightgowns before closing the suitcase. "There, Megan, your and Todd's pictures will be with your mom on her trip," he reassured her. Happy, Megan dashed out of the room and hurried down the stairs to find her brother and share her excitement. Kyle turned his attention back to his wife. She felt like a stranger to him now. He wished someone could help them reconnect. "What's going on, Peggy?" he asked. Peggy had learned to defend herself quickly and often used that approach. "Nothing's going on," she replied firmly. "Why are you asking so many questions?" "Peggy, you packed all your nice evening clothes and several pairs of shoes. Every other work trip, you took something simple and told me that was all you needed. You've packed enough to go out every night. Is that what you're planning?" His wife began to shake her head before he finished talking. "No, that's not what I have in mind," she said quickly. "Look, in case you didn't know, I'm moving up in the company. I need to be ready for formal events at any moment and look professional. That's part of being in management, you know." Her tone was strong. She felt she had a good reason for her choices. "And I just wanted to take my nightgowns," she added. Kyle didn't bring up anything else in the bag. He picked up the plastic bag from the dresser where he had left it earlier and opened it slowly. He placed the bag on the bed in front of his wife. Her eyes followed its movement, and when it rested on the bed, she recognized it, and her face turned red. I don't know where those came from," she said. Even as she spoke, she could tell how weak her response sounded. Kyle took out 2 sheets of paper from the bag and pretended to read them. "Well, the receipt is from yesterday, and this credit card slip shows our Visa card number," he said in a calm voice. His wife seemed to pull back, sinking into a seat next to her bags. "Kyle," she said softly, "you have to see it from my point of view, please." Kyle looked at her, surprised by her words. She wanted him to agree that she had a right to be with someone else because she felt he had betrayed her. "Kyle, I just want us to be equal again so we can move on, okay?" she said earnestly, pleading for his understanding. He realized that only her mother might truly understand how Peggy felt. He shook his head. "Peggy, what happened with Anne was not meant to hurt you or Paul. It was an accident. If you go to Chicago to be with someone else to get even, you're choosing to act in a way that could really change our marriage. Is that what you want? Do you want a divorce?" Kyle asked sincerely. Peggy's face grew serious. "No," she said firmly. "I do not want a divorce. I just want us to be equal in this marriage. We need to be equal, or one day I might choose a different path. Do you understand that?" "Okay," Kyle replied. "You had an issue in the parking lot because of something that wasn't right. I had a problem with Anne. So we're even now. We're back to being equal." His tone was sarcastic, and Peggy shot him a glare. "Those aren't the same, and you know it," she said sharply. "You're right," Kyle responded. "When you bought a dress we couldn't afford, you weren't honest with me. You said you wouldn't buy it, then it caused trouble for us. That's the big difference. I haven't lied to you about anything, and Anne and I were clear about what happened. Maybe I should have been more upset about the dress and what that did to our finances. What do you think I should do now?" "I returned the dress," Peggy replied quietly. Kyle let out a breath. "The damage to my trust in you and our situation has already happened, Peggy," Kyle said softly. "Once again, what should happen next because of what you chose?" Kyle watched Peggy shake her head in frustration. Her eyes showed a mix of feelings, revealing her deep distress. He sighed. With everything she had learned, Peggy found it hard to respond. "Well, I don't know either, Peggy," he said gently. "I will ask again. Do you want to separate?" he asked. "I would understand if that's what you decided," Kyle told her, even though he would not agree with that choice. Peggy shook her head again, her eyes filling with tears. He wasn't sure if they showed frustration or sadness about the idea of separating. "In that case, Peggy," he continued, "I'm not going to let you do something that would make it hard for us to work through this. I will not allow you to go to Chicago and seek comfort with someone else out of anger. Do you hear me?" He felt it was important to say this, even if he wondered if it was wise. Peggy seemed to regain her strength as he spoke. She felt ready to defend her choices. She tried to brush off the meaning behind the things he had noticed, feeling a rise in defiance. At first, she almost admitted to their purpose, but she quickly held back, justifying her reaction as a response to his worries about their marriage. In truth, she claimed she had gotten those items for a friend who needed help with a health issue. Peggy explained that in her rush the day before, she had forgotten to give them to her friend. She had planned to take them right away, and that small mistake shouldn't lead to such heavy judgment from Kyle. Kyle knew deep down her explanation didn't add up. He remembered past conversations that hinted there was more to the story. However, he decided to stay quiet. His wife had reached a new level of dishonesty, and he was trying to understand it. Peggy noticed the disbelief on Kyle's face, and it made her angry. She started to confront him about Anne while insisting she had no plans for revenge. "All right," she said. She packed away the nightgowns and clothes from her luggage, putting them back into her drawers. She returned 2 evening dresses and a cocktail dress to the closet. She was determined to show Kyle that she wasn't planning anything. When she finished, everything fit into the largest suitcase and the garment bag. She added a pantsuit that she hadn't had room for before. "You realize, don't you, that I'll see any purchases you make in Chicago on the credit card or bank statements?" he said quietly. Peggy's face went pale. He understood why she was giving in so easily. "You'll regret the day." She stopped mid-sentence, stuffing her flannel nightshirt into the suitcase and zipping it up with force. Avoiding Kyle, she carried the heavy bag out of the bedroom and set it at the top of the stairs. She knew that carrying it down could cause her to stumble. Without looking back, she walked down the stairs, her body tense and upright. "Brad, how's it going, buddy?" Kyle said to one of his oldest friends as he entered the garage to make a phone call. He wanted to keep Peggy from hearing. It would only make her more upset. "Good, good. How about you, big guy?" Brad replied cheerfully. He had every reason to be happy. He had built a successful law practice from nothing, growing it into a firm with many partners and staff. Kyle guessed that Brad probably didn't even know how many people worked for him now. "I'm doing pretty well," Kyle said. "Not as great as some, but better than others." Brad laughed. Kyle never aimed to be extremely wealthy, but he owned the local Fox TV franchise, a radio station, and had options on 2 more TV stations outside the city. Most of his success came from the trust fund his late father had arranged, but he hadn't lost any of that money. In fact, he was doing quite nicely in a modest way. Brad had done even better, but both were happy with their achievements, and, more importantly, they still remained close friends since elementary school. Kyle wasn't Brad's biggest client, but he was the most valued. Their friendship had grown stronger when Kyle played as a fullback, helping to clear the way for Brad as they played together in junior high and high school. They were a great team back then, and they still were. Each of them knew secrets about the other that no one else did. "We should meet up for a good meal," Brad suggested. "What do you think about you and Peggy coming over for a barbecue on Sunday? How does that sound?" Kyle paused. "Well, that might not be the best idea," Kyle said slowly. "I'm calling you because there's something about Peggy that I need to talk to you about." Brad quickly shifted his focus, ready to help his friend with a problem. "I'm sorry to hear that," Brad said at once. "What can I do for you, number 42? That had been Kyle's jersey number, and Brad wore 22. He was reminding Kyle of their many years of friendship, which was comforting. "Well, it's not serious enough for me to hire you as my lawyer." "Not yet," Kyle explained. "But I was hoping I could ask you for a favor." "Just let me know," Brad replied, ready to listen. "You have a good relationship with old Jake Bruckmeister, right?" Kyle asked. Bruckmeister & Son was the accounting firm where Peggy worked as a senior analyst. "Of course," Brad said quickly. "He was one of my dad's closest friends before he passed away. One of his granddaughters even worked as a clerk in my office during her summer breaks from law school. Well, I was wondering if you could call him and share a concern I have, that the workplace rules in his firm are not being, enforced as strictly as they should be." Kyle was choosing his words carefully. He had practiced what to say and hoped it came out correctly. "If you could mention that I have some solid information about Mrs. Peggy Whiteley and one of her colleagues going to the Chicago conference considering bending the rules, and you could say that might make us think about the company's policies." Well, it raises questions about those morality guidelines. They should really stop that kind of behavior. Understood, Brad replied eagerly. When is Peggy leaving? In 3 hours, Kyle said. Plenty of time, Brad noted. You don't want her to go? Nope, Kyle responded. She has some things packed that show she's still upset about the situation with Ann Blakely that I told you about. You remember? Yeah, I got it, Brad replied. I'll make the call when we're done here. I'll do my best to keep her from finding out you're behind this, but be ready for some drama anyway, he said lightly. Kyle hadn't thought about that. He had been focused on saving what was left of his marriage. He had not fully accepted her tendency to be untruthful. It was clear she usually got upset when things did not go her way. Peggy was going to be upset whether she learned about Kyle's role in stopping the trip or not. Whitley? Sam asked, noticing her sudden silence. Yes, I'm here, Peggy replied, her voice tense. I just can't believe Junior would decide this without talking to me first. Well, you know how he is. He thinks it's good to have new ideas at these events. I understand why you're frustrated, Sam tried to comfort her. Frustrated doesn't even begin to cover it, she said, taking a deep breath. I've been working hard, and I feel unappreciated. I understand. Just keep doing your best, and remember, your chance for progress will come, he said. Peggy valued the kind words, but they didn't lighten her disappointment. Thanks, Sam, she replied, trying to sound professional. I'll do my best. After hanging up, Peggy took a moment to gather her thoughts. She had spent years on her work, and this felt like a setback. Still, she was determined not to let it stop her from moving forward in her career. As she walked towards her desk, she decided to focus on her upcoming projects and prove her worth to the team. She wouldn't be pushed aside easily. Whiteley? McMillan asked. You're taking me off the trip? Peggy said, her voice shaking. Why? Is there something I should know? She asked, filled with doubt. No, not that I know of, Sam replied. No one has said anything to me, he added. But I will need you to come into the office tomorrow morning since you're not going. Would you like to take some vacation time? Peggy noticed a hint of fun in his voice. Sam wasn't worried that one of his team members would miss the training. He likely found her disappointment amusing, which only made her more frustrated. In his office on the 4th floor, Sam McMillan smiled to himself. He felt pleased that Peggy Whiteley wouldn't be going on the trip. Little did she know, news had spread about her plans for his job. Without the training from the conference, he could easily change her upcoming performance review for the worse. Okay, I'll see you bright and early tomorrow, Peggy said cheerfully into the phone, trying not to show how upset she was. After the call ended, she looked out the kitchen window. Now, she wouldn't have any time alone with Roger, the only single man among the group going to Chicago. That changed her plans. Roger probably would have liked some time with her, but that chance was gone now. Peggy felt frustrated as she thought about her career. She had wanted to learn new skills for her next raise, but now that would be postponed, which would reflect poorly on her record. A week later, Peggy heard rumors that her trip to Chicago was canceled due to gossip about her and one of the men attending. The Brookmeisters, senior and junior, had no idea that a quiet clerk was handling documents nearby, unaware of the stories being shared. The clerk tried to keep quiet, but eventually told the new secretary on the 5th floor, who quickly spread the word. Even though he didn't get the date he wanted with her, at least they chatted this time. At first, Peggy didn't notice the whispers around her. Most of her coworkers seemed to find something funny, but she brushed it off. Few of them were worth her time. It wasn't until Roger Compton came to her desk that she learned about the rumors. He told her he wasn't interested in her and that he was committed to his girlfriend. He suggested she back off. Peggy couldn't believe his outburst and expressed her annoyance that he thought she was even interested in him. Roger walked away without saying anything, which only made her more upset. Linda, who knew more about the situation, caught up with Peggy during lunch and explained the stories circulating in the office. The 3 men originally set to travel had shared their thoughts after hearing the first gossip. Roger was the only one of the group with whom Peggy had shared any smiles, leading people to draw their own conclusions. Only Peggy knew the truth, and she would never share it. The workers in their office building believed the gossip completely. When Peggy got home, the anger she had felt all day finally came out, and she confronted Kyle directly. "You did something to make sure I didn't go to Chicago?" Peggy said angrily. Kyle had just come home after picking up the kids from daycare and was smiling about something Todd had said. The smile faded as he noticed Peggy's tone, while Mandy and Todd looked at their mother in confusion. "What's wrong with you?" Kyle replied sharply. Peggy continued, "I talked to Roger today." She was about to say more when Kyle interrupted. "He called me. He wanted to make sure I knew he wasn't going to pursue anything with you," Kyle said. Peggy was momentarily speechless. Anger stirred inside her at the thought of the two men discussing her without her knowledge. "You had no right to talk to him," she said firmly. "Who do you think you are? You can't decide how I feel or what I should do." Kyle shook his head, tired from the day. "This isn't about control, Peggy. It's about two men deciding not to be influenced by anything." He straightened up and rubbed his back, showing how drained he was as they stood in silence, both feeling the growing tension in their lives. "Besides, I told you, he called me," Kyle added. "Don't get mad at me for what he did." "I don't believe you," Peggy fired back. "You somehow made sure I couldn't go to the training, and you had no right to do that." Peggy stepped toward the doorway, her fingers tense. Kyle narrowed his eyes as she moved closer. Suddenly, he turned away from her. "Come on, kids," he said cheerfully. "Who wants to go to Chuck E. Cheese?" Both children cheered excitedly and ran toward Kyle's truck. Kyle leaned against the screen door and raised his voice for Peggy to hear. "You need to calm down, Peggy," he said seriously. "If you ever speak to me like that in front of the kids again, I'll leave with them. I won't have you yelling and acting like this around them. I'm serious, and you need to listen. This has to change, or I will leave you, no question." Without saying anything more, he pulled the door closed, making it hit the doorframe. He let the screen door slam, not bothering to close it carefully as he usually did. When Kyle and the kids came back, Peggy had changed. She greeted them with a warm smile. She had switched from her work clothes into a long, cozy housecoat that buttoned all the way to her neck. The scent of her favorite lavender bath beads filled the air. She looked bright and cheerful, excited to spend time with her husband and children. She sat with Mandy and Todd as they excitedly talked about the games they had played and showed her pictures from their fun day at Chuck E. Cheese. Peggy listened closely, offering encouragement as they explained how each game worked. After a while, Kyle decided to head upstairs for a warm shower. It had been a long day. Kyle read a story to the little boy and his sister, kissed them goodnight, and tucked them in gently. He took a moment to enjoy watching his children sleep. When he entered his and Peggy's bedroom, he noticed she wasn't there. A gentle touch on his shoulders from behind told him she had waited for him to arrive. "Guess who?" Peggy said playfully, covering his eyes. She stepped in front of him with a smile, ready to greet him. Peggy's enthusiastic approach was warm and welcoming. She knew how to catch his attention quickly. In just a few seconds, the excitement in him grew noticeable. "Come here," she whispered. She led him to the big chair by the window and encouraged him to sit down. She knelt beside him, her movements calm and thoughtful as they enjoyed their space together. Feeling close, he pulled Peggy into his arms and they shared a sweet moment. Their closeness deepened as they felt the warmth of each other. His hand found hers, showing his caring nature. He wanted to comfort her, and she responded warmly, appreciating his thoughtfulness. Their connection was filled with a special energy, a mutual respect for each other. After a few moments, Peggy smiled down at him, her gaze steady and inviting. She moved a little closer, strengthening their bond. With a shared sigh, they embraced, enjoying the trust and affection in their relationship. Kyle gently returned her affection, savoring the moment and cherishing their connection. He marveled at the joy they created together, celebrating the love that held them close. Focused on each other, they exchanged gentle touches, and Peggy felt grateful for the time and care he gave to her happiness. It was clear he was a loving partner, and she felt lucky to share such a strong bond. Yet, amidst this closeness, Peggy's thoughts turned toward wanting to deepen their connection even further. Peggy sat down next to Kyle, their hands intertwined as they enjoyed a quiet moment together. Kyle smiled at her, feeling the warmth of their bond. He gently pulled her closer, finding comfort in their familiar embrace. "Want to go upstairs?" Kyle asked softly, his voice full of warmth. Peggy nodded and took Kyle's hand as they walked to their bedroom. As they went up the stairs, they exchanged playful looks, the warmth of their love visible in their gentle touches and shared laughs. Once inside the bedroom, they took their time, savoring the moment. Their closeness reflected years of care and trust, each movement showing their strong bond. They lay together, feeling happy in the peaceful quiet of the evening. Peggy rested her head on Kyle's shoulder, comforted by the steady rhythm of his breathing. "I'm really glad we're in this together," Peggy whispered, her voice sincere. Kyle gave her a gentle kiss on the forehead, filled with love for her. Feeling her husband's presence filled Peggy with warmth and comfort. She let herself relax even more, feeling connected to him. They lay side by side, with Kyle leaning back next to her, both catching their breath. They enjoyed the quiet moments, reaching out to touch each other softly. Their closeness gave them both a sense of comfort. After a while, they continued to enjoy those moments, moving slowly and without rush. "I'm sorry, Kyle," she said softly, trying to stay awake but slowly feeling drowsy. Her head rested on his shoulder, and she felt safe next to him. "I know I can be difficult sometimes, but it's not on purpose," she said, feeling more at ease with him than she had in a long time. "Peggy," he replied gently, "we need to move forward, with the kids, with our life. We've been stuck on this one thing for too long." He spoke in a calm and understanding tone. "I know," she said quietly. She shifted for a moment, then settled back against him. "I just can't stop thinking about you and Anne. And it hurts, Kyle. It drives me crazy to think of you two together." Her voice revealed a deep need for understanding, and Kyle tried to reassure her. "Honey, I understand. I would feel upset if you were with someone else. I never wanted to hurt you. I couldn't do that to you. I never will," he said. He hoped his words would help, but he was not sure if they had the right effect. She didn't move away, and they stayed close the rest of the night. However, she didn't show any signs of forgiveness either. He felt in the morning that what they had was a kind of peace, but not a complete resolution. Chapter 3. One quiet Saturday morning at the end of August, Kyle made a decision. He wanted to do everything he could to keep Peggy faithful to their marriage. He realized he could never forgive her for a serious betrayal. He had already taken steps to change her plans for a trip. He made sure she couldn't go to a conference in Chicago. Until now, he hadn't thought much about how to show her she didn't need to break her promises. Watching Mandy and Todd play in a sandbox at the park, he understood he would go to great lengths to keep his family together. If it took more effort, that was okay. There was no rule saying Peggy had to meet him halfway. If he needed to work harder, he was ready to do that. He was committed to keeping Peggy, Mandy, and Todd together as a united family. Peggy wasn't with them at the park. She was working late to finish an important report. This was the third Saturday in a row she had to work, and he could see it was becoming tiring for her. Suddenly, he had an idea. "Kids, come here for a minute," he called. Mandy and Todd jumped up and ran to their father. They had been playing for a while and were eager for a change. Kyle bent down to their level and whispered a secret just for them. They leaned in closer, and he wrapped his arms around them. "What if we get all cleaned up," he said, "and go get a big pizza?" Their faces lit up with excitement. "And we can take our pizza to see Mommy?" This made them cheer and dance with joy. They quickly agreed and put the plan into action. When they arrived at Peggy's office at lunchtime, everyone greeted them with warm smiles. Kyle had brought enough pizza and drinks for everyone in the office. As everyone realized what was happening, the staff gathered around, playfully bumping into each other as they reached for the slices of pizza. The atmosphere in the office lifted immediately. The mood became happier when Mandy and Todd handed their mother sweet cards, showing how much they missed her. A little while later, when Kyle took them home, the kids had been hugged many times and had fun exploring the keyboards, trying to see what was on the screens. Mandy was especially interested in a card game on the computer. As they left, the smiles from the office stayed, brightening the rest of the day. Everyone worked hard to finish the project, and many praised Peggy for having such a wonderful husband and family. Some of the single women wanted to know if Kyle had a brother who was available. Kyle was aware of this and tried hard to make sure Peggy didn't feel left out. It had been 10 months since a difficult event, and he thought she might have moved on. But that wasn't true. He worried it still weighed on her, so he did everything he could to help her feel better, hoping that over time her worries would lessen. He started dropping by her office when she didn't expect him. Sometimes he took her out for lunch. Other times he brought packed lunches and sat with her, making her laugh and enjoying conversations with anyone nearby. Occasionally he surprised her after work with a trip to a show. Every so often he sent her flowers at the office, accompanied by a sweet card. On her birthday, she received a whole lot of flowers and decorations in her workspace. A new person at the office noticed and quickly lost interest in Peggy, realizing she had someone who cared a lot for her. The married women at work began to look to Kyle as a model for how husbands should treat their wives, wishing their partners would show the same thoughtfulness. Whenever Kyle's name came up, the women smiled and remarked how lucky Peggy was to have him. But not many noticed how tension appeared on Peggy's face when they praised her partner. Few saw the slight annoyance that sometimes flashed across her expression when Kyle showed up unexpectedly. People wondered why Peggy seemed less excited about the flowers and treats she received without warning. They did not know about Kyle's mistake months ago, since Peggy never talked about her feelings with anyone. She believed that no one would understand her point of view. "Hi, Mom," Peggy said during their usual Thursday evening call. "Hi, sweetheart," her mom replied. "What's going on? Have you been able to get Kyle to understand what he did?" "No," Peggy sighed. "I don't think he ever will." "That's not right," Denise argued. "You must stand up to him, Peggy. You know that's important." "But Mom, I never get a chance to meet anyone else. Kyle always shows up wherever I am at work, the tennis club. Pretty soon I'll probably see him at the gym. I can't get any space to figure things out." Her mother listened with concern. "Is there no one at work?" she asked, sounding doubtful. Peggy scoffed. "Every woman at the office is all about him," Peggy complained. "If I even smile at another man, one of them will call my husband so fast he could be right behind me before I even say hello." Denise responded sympathetically, understanding how Peggy felt stifled. She wished things were different, especially since Kyle had gotten everyone at work on his side. But she didn't know how to change what had already happened. "Well, let's think," Denise said, tapping the phone with her long fingernail. Peggy found it annoying, but she kept quiet as usual. "I guess you should give up the idea of a quick meeting with someone," Denise said sadly. "Absolutely not," Peggy replied forcefully. "Kyle let that woman take advantage of him, and I want to make him feel what I've been feeling. I will have my moment, no matter what." Neither Peggy nor her mother realized that their words suggested something deeper. Denise didn't want to think about what she was really encouraging her daughter to do. They both understood on some level, but it didn't feel real to them. It was simply a way to settle the score with Kyle. "That's my girl," Denise responded cheerfully. "You can't let him treat you this way. He should be the one feeling unhappy, not you. He needs to experience a little of what you've been through." Suddenly, the loud wail of a fire truck siren filled the air. It grew louder and louder, shaking the walls of the house and even vibrating in the bodies of the people inside. For a few seconds, the siren was their whole world. The truck sped by, followed by the softer sounds of an ambulance and a rescue vehicle. As the emergency vehicles moved down the street, the sound changed, fading in pitch and volume. "Wow," Denise said, laughing. "For a moment, I thought that truck was driving right into your room." "Yeah, I thought it might come through the window," Peggy chuckled. "It was really loud, I'll tell you that." "So where were we?" Denise asked. "We were discussing how I need to find a way to get back at my husband," Peggy reminded her. "Right," Denise said. "You know, if you want, there are plenty of nice gentlemen at your dad's and my country club. If you came with me one afternoon, I could introduce you." "No, Mom," Peggy replied hesitantly. "I told Kyle years ago how much I disliked that club and all its pretense. He'd suspect something if I suddenly decided to go there." "Yeah," Denise said, sounding a bit let down. "I understand." A short silence followed. "You know, I just don't understand why Kyle won't admit he was wrong to let that Ann woman do what she did. He needs to see that you deserve to address this situation. It's completely reasonable, and he should realize that." It just doesn't make sense, she said, feeling annoyed. I know, Peggy replied, but he acts like he controls my choices and won't let me have any peace. You can have all the peace you want, a deep voice said. You just can't act without thinking it will fix everything. Kyle had stepped into the den to make a call when things got noisy from the fire truck that had just left. In all the commotion, neither woman noticed he had picked up the phone. Peggy and Denise fell silent for a moment, surprised. Kyle! Peggy shouted into the phone, feeling angry. Get off the phone! You can't listen in when I'm talking to my mother! You have no right to invade my conversations! I wasn't trying to listen, Peggy, Kyle replied calmly. I just picked up to call Fred about golfing tomorrow. I didn't mean to hear what you and your mom were talking about. But I have to say, some people can't be trusted. And that's why they need supervision. Peggy slammed the phone down, her anger spilling over. Kyle could hear it from downstairs, and Denise caught it softly through the line. You have some nerve, Denise said sharply. Who do you think you are? You can't treat us like that. Kyle cut her off, saying, I will speak to my wife however I want, Denise. It's none of your business how I talk to her, and you need to stay out of our issues. You can't come between us, and it needs to stop. You listen to me, you rude man, Denise began, visibly upset and needing to take a deep breath to calm herself. No, you listen to me, Denise, Kyle replied firmly. If your daughter goes through with what she's been thinking about for months, she will lose everything she cares about. She will lose me, her children, her friends. She will lose the respect of her co-workers. She will lose everything, Denise, I promise. If I find out you helped her in any way, there will be consequences. Do you understand? I might not know the law well, but I'm sure someone could find a way. Do you hear me? Stay out of it, Denise. His voice got louder as he spoke. His anger grew the more he thought about what he had heard. He slammed the phone down hard before she could say anything. 20 minutes later, while he was still walking around the block to cool off before going home to talk to Peggy, his cell phone rang. He had gone outside while Peggy was still getting ready to come downstairs. He expected the first call to be from her, but when he looked at the screen, he saw it was his father-in-law. His first thought was to ignore the call, but then he decided to answer it. He figured it was a good time to talk to Dan. Kyle? Dan asked when Kyle didn't say anything. What do you mean by threatening my wife and shouting at her? What's happening? He sounded confused. Dan, let me explain, Kyle replied calmly. I heard your wife suggesting a way for Peggy to get back at me for what happened last Valentine's Day. What? Dan replied weakly, trying to understand what Kyle meant. Yeah, that's what I thought, Dan, Kyle said bitterly. Can you imagine hearing your mother-in-law say she would help Peggy get back at me? That's really upsetting. Now, I don't think you need to talk that way, Kyle, Dan said slowly. Accusing my wife of something like that is serious. It was a weak argument, and both men knew it. Kyle wished he knew what was happening on Dan's side. He would have felt better if he did. At that moment, Dan was glaring at his wife. For a long while, Denise matched his glare, but she could not keep it up. She hadn't realized how her words could come across until Dan turned around and looked at her with anger. She was shocked by the look on her husband's face. Suddenly, she knew she had gone too far. What she thought was a simple suggestion now felt like a big mistake. She hadn't thought about how her comments about the men at the club could be seen. Well, it's actually a bit worse than that, Dad, Kyle said unhappily. You might want to think about what she said. Like what? Dan asked quickly, his anger shifting from Kyle to what was happening. Well, think about it, Dan. Your wife was encouraging Peggy to make choices that could lead to regret, Kyle explained. That suggests Denise thinks it's okay to compromise one's values sometimes, and I think that would make me uneasy if I were you. Dan was silent for a long time as he thought about Kyle's words. His frown turned colder and more determined as he looked at his wife's worried face. Yeah, I see your point, son, Dan said in a steady voice. My daughter is too much like her mother sometimes, he said quietly, gazing at the woman he loved. I blame myself for some of that, he reflected. She was the youngest, and during a busy time in my life, I didn't have enough time to make sure her mom didn't influence her with some bad ideas, Dan added. Kyle heard a frustrated noise from Denise. He almost smiled. It was the first funny thing he had seen in a while. Kyle, I'm sorry for getting upset with you, Dan said softly, And I'm sorry for my difficult wife as well. Kyle could hear someone gasp in the background. Son, I promise you that my wife won't get involved in your and Peggy's matters again, as long as she is my wife, Dan said. I need to go now. There are some things to handle at home, Kyle. Good luck to you, okay? Sure, Dad, Kyle replied. Good luck to you, too. The call ended. Across town, Dan looked at his wife with a serious expression. Denise, he said calmly. How long have we been married? 34 years, Denise answered carefully. Do you want to reach 35? Dan asked firmly. When Kyle got home, he found Peggy unusually quiet. She had called her mother back when the line was free and got a brief summary of what Dan and Kyle had talked about. Denise told Peggy that her father was angrier than she had ever seen him. He had gone for a drive, saying he hoped she would be home when he got back. He told Denise that when he returned, they needed to discuss her thoughts on relationships, especially regarding Peggy's relationship with Kyle and how their own marriage should move forward. After dinner, with a tense feeling in the house, Kyle and Peggy sat in the living room, pretending to enjoy each other's company while they played with the children. The TV was on quietly, but neither of them was paying attention. Once the kids went to bed, the phone rang. It was Denise, saying she was sorry to Peggy for even suggesting that Peggy think about any relationships at the Hidden Hills Club. She expressed regret and hoped Peggy understood that those suggestions were not right. Surprised, Peggy mostly stayed quiet during the call, answering in short phrases. When Denise asked to talk with Kyle, Peggy passed the phone to him without saying anything. Kyle spoke a few words. He acknowledged Denise's feelings without saying much more, then hung up without giving the phone back to his wife. His mother-in-law sounded truly sorry and upset during the call, showing she had put thought into it. Kyle hoped for the best for everyone moving forward. That's the last time, Kyle said quietly, surprising Peggy. She was still thinking about her mother's new tone. She had never heard her mother sound so emotional before. Denise had talked about the need to resolve things with Kyle before it was too late. Peggy wasn't sure if this new attitude from her mother was permanent or just a response to the situation. What? Peggy asked, briefly distracted. That's the last time I'm going to try to stop you from making a serious mistake, Kyle replied. I've had enough of this, he said, pointing to his neck, with you sneaking around and thinking you have a reason for what you've done because of the past. He watched her for a long time. Neither of them said a word. Kyle stared at Peggy as if she were someone he hardly knew. I'm not going to mess up, Peggy finally replied. Her voice was firm, but it was softer than before. That's just in your head. Kyle snorted. He knew when someone was trying to twist the truth. That's nice, Peggy, he said with a hint of sarcasm. He leaned in closer and lowered his voice so she had to focus. Because if you ever do, we are done. Do you get that? We are finished if you ever choose to be with another man, Peggy glared at him. You mean like you did with Anne? She challenged. Kyle shook his head. Don't even start. You know that's not true. What happened with Anne was not on purpose. We both thought the other was someone else, and we stopped as soon as we found out. That was just a mistake, a regrettable mix-up. What you're trying to do is completely different, and deep down, you know it, he said firmly. They had talked about this too many times, and he was tired of it. Peggy shook her head. He could see she couldn't accept that he and Anne were innocent. Well, you better find a way to deal with it, Kyle told her, knowing the stubborn look on her face. I mean it. If you ever betray my trust, I won't hesitate to end things. The look in her eyes showed she didn't believe him. Her jaw was set in defiance. He sighed and went to bed, feeling that nothing he did could stop the trouble he saw ahead. Chapter 4. The coldness lasted for months. Their close moments, which had been getting better, fell to almost nothing. Kyle found himself having many quiet nights, with only 1 or 2 times of connection every few weeks. To handle the stress, he often went to the bathroom late at night for a bit of peace. He focused all his energy on making sure his kids didn't notice the problems between him and Peggy. Sometimes he succeeded, but other times it was hard to hide. He and Peggy felt like they were just sharing a house rather than being a couple. To escape the tension, he grew closer to his son and daughter, finding comfort in their love. He taught Todd how to tie his shoelaces and worked with him on manners and social skills. Todd had picked up the habit of laughing at burping, which was tricky for Kyle to change. Mandy was growing up quickly. The little legs of a toddler were becoming longer and leaner as she entered grade school. Over the winter and spring, he patiently taught her to read books that were much more advanced than what most 6-year-olds would tackle. They spent many hours together, with her sitting on his lap, sounding out words and giving him joyful hugs when she understood what she was reading. Todd didn't fully understand what they were doing, but he loved celebrating with his sister and dad, enjoying the warmth of their closeness. One day, as they sat together on the couch, Todd pointed out words he recognized while Mandy read her new book, strengthening their bond even more. Peggy watched this from a distance, unhappy but unwilling to get closer to Kyle or their kids. She withdrew further, unwilling to meet him halfway, and determined to eventually bring up her feelings about his past actions. Unexpectedly, 15 months after a brief encounter with Anne, Peggy's demeanor began to change. They started to share more moments together. Though it still lacked the intimacy it once had, it felt like a small improvement. Kyle reminded himself to take it slow and appreciate any progress. A few weeks later, Peggy told him that her training, which had been on hold, was back on. She would be going to Orlando for a week at the end of July, and she mentioned it casually, acting as if it was nothing for him to worry about. But inside, Kyle felt uneasy. "How long have you known?" he asked. Peggy hesitated, becoming a little colder. "The personnel office told me 2 days ago," she said, watching him closely for his reaction. While her words weren't untrue, she had known about the training for a month, arranging the details without telling him first. "And you're leaving at the end of next month?" Kyle asked. Peggy nodded. "Well, it sounds like they gave you plenty of warning this time," he noted, holding back his frustration. He refrained from asking why she hadn't told him sooner, possibly thinking it was because of his reaction to her last trip. Perhaps she was still mindful of that, but the look in her eyes suggested it was something else. Kyle watched as she happily went up the stairs, excited to start packing for her trip. He sighed, feeling tired. He didn't ask Peggy about the delay in telling him anything because he didn't mind anymore. She came to him, feeling fresh after her shower. Peggy started to think about her plans for Orlando and what the future would hold. Her thoughts quickly shifted to her and Kyle and how they could refresh their marriage after her trip. She felt excited about the chance to make their bond even stronger. Wrapped in a towel, she walked into the bedroom, taking the book he was reading and setting it aside. She moved closer, putting her arms around his shoulders and smiling softly. "I missed you," she said kindly. Kyle felt a little unsure but decided to push his worries aside and enjoy being with her. Peggy giggled and took his hand, leading him to the bed. They sat close together, sharing a quiet moment as they enjoyed the calmness of the evening. She'd been thinking about her trip to Orlando and how she could reconnect with Kyle afterward. She found herself wanting to bring back the excitement they once had as a couple. Wrapped in her towel, she approached him in the bedroom, gently taking his book and placing it down. She sat on his lap, putting her arms around his neck and giving him a sweet kiss. "I've missed you," she said softly, her tone warm. Kyle looked at her, surprised but also feeling affection. He sensed her need for closeness and welcomed it. Seeing his positive reaction, Peggy beamed and stood up, taking his hand. They went to the bed, where she sat at the edge, giving him a playful look. "I need you," she whispered with a smile. She lay back and watched Kyle sit at the edge of the bed as they both caught their breath. "You really had to work for that one," she said with a hint of teasing. She noticed Kyle stiffen, and he opened his mouth to respond but hesitated. "Yeah," he finally said. "It helps when both people are interested. It's tough when only one is." Peggy felt a surge of anger. "What do you mean by that?" she asked strongly. Kyle didn't reply. He leaned over to pick up his pajamas and walked into the bathroom. A significant moment in their marriage had passed, and while he felt sad, he also mourned the loss of something that could never be restored. "Peggy?" he said, watching as his wife finished her coffee. "Yeah, hun," she replied, rinsing the cup in the sink. Peggy always kept things tidy. The cup joined the others on the top shelf of the dishwasher. "Do you remember that time right after I overheard your mother talking about the men at the Hidden Hills Club?" Peggy tensed. This was not the direction she wanted Kyle's thoughts to go this morning. I remember, Kyle, but that was a long time ago. Mom apologized, and it's behind us now, she said, hoping to wrap up the conversation quickly. No, that's not what I meant, Kyle said softly. Back then, I told you I wouldn't interfere with your decisions again. Peggy turned to face him, curious about what he would say next. She felt confident that she hadn't done anything to worry Kyle since that event. Her jaw set. This time, she hadn't made any mistakes. She waited for her husband to continue. Well, I wasn't honest, Kyle admitted. Peggy blinked in surprise. That was the last thing she expected to hear. What? She asked, confused. I wasn't honest. I'm going to try one last time, Peggy, he said gently. I know what you're planning, honey. I know what you're going to do in Orlando, he added softly. Peggy leaned against the counter and thought back on every conversation she'd had and every message she'd sent or received about the Orlando trip. There was nothing that suggested she was planning to betray him. Suddenly, she felt angry. Damn it, Kyle, she said sharply. I'm not planning anything. I told you that long ago. I didn't believe you then, and I still don't believe you now, Kyle said plainly. You struggle to forgive and move on. I know you too well, he finished. Peggy kept her lips pressed together tightly. Please don't go through with it, baby, Kyle urged. Just don't. That's all I ask. I can manage without that side of our relationship. I'll get by without the affection. You don't even have to be nice to me. Just don't break up the family, please, Peggy. For Mandy and Todd? Peggy stared at him for a long moment, showing a hint of uncertainty. Her lips parted, but whatever she wanted to say remained unspoken when a loud horn blared from outside. Her taxi had arrived. She never answered Kyle's plea, and he didn't say it again. She gave him a friendly pat on the chest as a goodbye and walked out to the big yellow taxi. She waved goodbye as the cab drove away from the curb. Kyle watched it turn left at the corner and slowly disappear. Closing the door behind him, he let out a heavy sigh. He took his cell phone from its case on his belt. Brad? He said when the call connected. Hey, partner, Brad replied, not using his official lawyer voice. He understood that Kyle was hurting and there wasn't much anyone could do. She just left, Kyle said. All right, number 42, Brad said in a tired tone. Jimmy is already at the airport. I will call him and get things moving, and then we'll see what happens, okay? Yeah, Kyle said sadly. Thanks, Brad. I'll talk to you later. Bye, Brad replied quickly. There was nothing more to say. They had discussed the important things in several meetings over the past few weeks, especially since Peggy mentioned she would be going to a training seminar. The man at the airport looked very ordinary. His clothes were simple, blending in with the crowd. Nothing about his looks or movements would catch anyone's attention. He wandered around the luggage carousel, seemingly looking for his suitcase, clutching a baggage claim ticket while anxiously waiting for the next bag to appear. He seemed like a person stuck in a boring office job, one that offered nothing exciting except for perhaps a watch after many years of hard work. But he accepted his routine. He no longer tried to fight it and had given up long ago. However, this was not the whole truth. His name was Jimmy. He was a private investigator and a skilled one at that. He had arrived in Orlando on an American Airlines flight. Kyle's lawyer, Brad, had often called on him for discreet jobs. When Kyle wanted evidence regarding Peggy to help with a potential custody settlement, Brad immediately thought of Jimmy. Brad understood that the chances of success were slim, but he believed that with enough sensitive information, Peggy might not oppose the divorce to avoid those details becoming public. He and Kyle had talked deeply about it, friends helping friends. Brad knew it might not be right, but some situations called for desperate measures. Kyle, or number 42 as Brad called him, was Brad's closest friend, and he was willing to do a lot for him. Jimmy had been watching Peggy since she arrived at the airport and continued to observe her as she picked up her luggage in Orlando. It was easy. Mrs. Whitley had no idea anyone was watching her. To her, Jimmy blended in with the other luggage carts. When a tall man walked through the door, he caught everyone's attention. Since 9/11s, any disturbances in public places raised eyebrows. When it became clear that the newcomer was not a threatening figure and had no visible weapon, most people lost interest. However, some continued to watch, curious about the scene he created. Jimmy kept a close eye on the man, sensing he could be significant. The man scanned the area until he spotted Peggy Whitley and quickly walked over to her. Their greeting was a bit reserved, as if they were still getting used to talking to each other. Jimmy noted that this closeness was not what Peggy had been advised to pursue, according to the briefing he received. He took out his phone and made a call. Trying to seem uninterested in what was happening around him, he captured pictures of the man and Peggy chatting easily. Over the next few minutes, they moved closer to each other, and their conversation became more relaxed. Jimmy followed them to the parking garage, pretending to struggle with heavy suitcases, a laptop, and a garment bag. The pair he tracked did not notice the ordinary man trailing behind. He paused his pursuit when they reached a dark blue Lincoln parked on the 4th level. As he walked by, he secretly took a picture with a small camera hidden in his palm. The clear images would easily upload to his laptop for sharing with his lawyer contact. Mr. Whitley had given Jimmy Peggy's reservation details, making it easy for him to book a room next to hers. A small tip left in a magazine helped open the door. The magazine remained on the counter as Jimmy turned to head to the elevators. He unpacked his things and had time to nap before a friend of a friend knocked on his door. His backup had arrived. Although he could have worked this case alone, he knew he would need specialized equipment he couldn't carry on the plane without drawing attention. Jimmy was surprised to find that his assistant was a pleasant woman named Cassie. She had been an investigator for 3 years. They chatted as they went to a side exit and took a sturdy pole made of sections from Cassie's car. Once put together, they could extend a small digital camcorder or microphone mounted on the end up to 18 feet over a gap between 2 balconies in a high-rise hotel for better surveillance. This setup was intended for nighttime since anyone in the room would notice equipment during the day. Cassie had brought information from one of her friends about an unofficial license plate check. Peggy's friend was Mr. Harold Lowry, a mid-level executive for the company hosting the training seminar. They did not have much information yet about how long Mr. Lowry had known Peggy, but with some effort, they planned to find out. Jimmy was confident that today's actions would leave a record trail. Soon, they would know everything about Mr. Lowry. They learned that Peggy would be at the training site until dinner time, as informed by her husband. They planned to begin their surveillance when she returned to the hotel to change. Feeling comfortable with each other right away, the 2 private investigators took turns watching for Peggy's return while the other rested. They prepared for a long evening, which was likely to be challenging. Neither of them liked working on cases of infidelity, but they understood it was part of the job. They aimed to provide what the client requested. Chapter 5. Peggy thought about her trip to Orlando, hoping that being apart might bring her closer to her husband Kyle. Excited and full of anticipation, she approached him. She gently set aside the book he was reading and gave him a warm hug. "I want to be near you," she said softly, her eyes filled with love. Kyle noticed her cheerful mood and smiled back, even though he felt a bit unsure. Peggy laughed as she led him to the sofa, feeling happy to spend time together. They enjoyed a peaceful evening at home, wrapped up in each other's presence. As they held each other, their bond grew deeper, and Peggy felt the troubles of the past fading away. She felt happy knowing that they would always find their way back to one another. She enjoyed the thrill of unexpected moments again. She felt a certain excitement all week long. Her heart raced, and she sensed a lively energy she hadn't felt in years. There were many moments from the last week she would treasure, especially the joy she felt during the seminars, observing the people around her and wondering about their little secrets. Just seeing Harold occasionally added a little excitement. There was a fun thrill in sharing quick smiles when no one was watching and the gentle touches during lunch. She smiled at the memory of his surprised face when they were out together. Those were sweet moments she could keep in her heart. On top of that, she had some enjoyable times back in her hotel room. She chuckled softly, and the driver glanced at her with a smile. Peggy returned the smile this time. She remembered Thursday night as a special time. Harold had invited her to the balcony, and the fresh air made her feel delightfully adventurous. The memories of that night stayed with her. It was one of those rare moments when their bond felt deep and fulfilling. Peggy wished Harold had been more satisfying than he was. She started thinking of other possibilities. There was a man in her training class. His name was Randy, and he was from Arizona. He had a charm that caught her interest. She wondered what it would have been like to share a moment with him, picturing the connection they could have had. Suddenly, Peggy realized this wouldn't be her last chance to be spontaneous. She thought about it for a moment. Kyle would never know she would make sure of that, and if he didn't know, it wouldn't hurt him. How could it? She decided to be careful and avoid planning elaborate meetings. It would have to be someone like Randy, an unexpected meeting in a place away from home. Yes, that was the planned chance encounters where Kyle wouldn't be. He wouldn't suspect anything because there would be no clues to give her away. She made up her mind against a long-term relationship. Those were too complicated, and she didn't want to get involved with someone else. Kyle was enough. Peggy shifted in her seat in the back of the taxi, feeling a bit uneasy. She realized this was something she shouldn't be doing. The driver might notice how distracted she was. It was a quick feeling of mischief that gave her a bit of excitement. Then she wondered when her next trip away would be. She thought about who she might meet, someone to share some light-hearted moments with. Yes, that sounded nice, spending time together without any serious feelings. It was a pleasant thought. Her phone rang. "Hello?" she answered happily. "Mrs. Whiteley? This is Sam McMillan." "Hi, Sam, how are you today?" Peggy didn't have a strong liking for her boss, but she kept her tone friendly. "Pretty good," Mr. McMillan replied. He didn't ask about her day. "I'm going to get straight to the point, Mrs. Whiteley," he said, and she could hear a hint of amusement in his voice. "Okay," Peggy replied, curious. "Well, here it is, Mrs. Whiteley," he continued. "I have to let you know that your job at Bruckmeister & Son is being ended. Mr. Bruckmeister Jr. wants you to come to the office on Monday morning to pick up your severance check and clean out your desk between 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock noon. He also mentioned that any questions you have can be answered then." Stunned, Peggy went silent for a moment. The taxi driver noticed her sudden change in mood. Her expression shifted so quickly that he kept a careful watch on her. He figured that this ride might not end with a generous tip. Focusing on the road again, he continued driving. I don't understand," Peggy finally said. "Why?" That was all she could think to ask. "I don't know, Mrs. Whiteley," Mr. McMillan responded. His voice sounded sincere. Peggy concluded that he really didn't have the answers, but it was clear he didn't care about her situation. Taking a deep breath, she prepared to reply. "Okay," she told her former boss. "I guess I'll just wait until Monday. Thank you for calling," she added, pressing the button to end the call, feeling a small sense of control. When Peggy arrived home, she was surprised to see her husband Kyle's big pickup truck wasn't in the driveway. She felt a wave of irritation. He should have been there. He was her only source of comfort now. He wouldn't question why she had lost her job. He would support her and care for her. As she stepped through the front door, she sensed that something was off. The grandfather's clock that had always stood in the hallway was gone. The umbrella stand in the corner was missing too. When she entered the living room, it was bare except for a few pieces of brown wrapping paper scattered about. The house was quiet. A chill ran down her spine. It felt empty, abandoned. Her cell phone rang again. She looked at the screen. It was Kyle. "Kyle," she said sharply. "Where are you? Where's all the furniture? What is happening?" Her voice got louder as she spoke. She was angry, hurt, and a bit scared. She didn't understand what was going on. "I won't tell you where I am, Peggy," Kyle replied calmly. He sounded exhausted. He was indeed feeling very tired. Packing up the house, moving all their furniture and belongings into a big truck had taken a toll on him. Telling the kids had been easier than he expected, but dealing with his own emotions had been draining. He had looked forward to this conversation, but knew it had to happen. He hadn't slept well since he had seen the early pictures of Peggy's time away. Those images had haunted him since he received them the day before. A private investigator had been able to convert videos and photos from a digital camera into better quality, and now Kyle had them locked away in his briefcase so that Peggy's children wouldn't see them by accident. Kyle and the kids had already packed. The initial images had been more than enough for Kyle. The events from the night before had given him and Brad what they needed if it ever came to that. The night vision on the camera had captured moments in places where people thought they were private. He had other plans for those pictures and videos. When one of Brad's team called to tell him Peggy was back home, he quickly called her cell phone. He didn't want to hesitate. He needed to get this done. If he shared everything on his mind, maybe he could finally rest tonight. "What? Why can't you just tell me where you are? Peggy shouted. I didn't say I couldn't, Peg, Kyle replied calmly. I said I wouldn't. Kyle Whiteley, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you better explain what's happening or I'm going to. Going to what, Peggy? Kyle interrupted, sounding frustrated. Can't you see? I've told you many times that if you chose to be with someone else because you thought I cheated on you, I would leave you. And I have. Peggy was shocked. Among all the surprises that day, this was the hardest to bear. Kyle, she said in a shaky voice. Please, I haven't. Stop, Peggy, Kyle cut in. You see why I've left. What more is there to say? What? What do you mean? I'm lost here, Peggy said, feeling confused. Have you been in the den? Kyle asked. No. Go there, Kyle told her. Reluctantly, Peggy walked down the short hallway to the back of the house and into the room they had turned into a study. When she entered, she finally understood. A large picture was propped on the shelf above the fireplace. It was faded and had a strange color to it, but it clearly showed her with Harold on a hotel balcony. Seeing it made her feel exposed and raw. Peggy collapsed to the floor. She couldn't stand anymore. She sat there with her legs tucked beneath her. The picture held her gaze completely, and she felt deep inside that this image signified the end of everything. Kyle, she said slowly, struggling with her words. Don't bother, Peggy, Kyle said. Now you see? Now you understand why the house feels empty. Now you know why the kids and I aren't there, right? Where are my kids? She shouted. You can't take my kids away from me. Her voice trembled with fear. Calm down, Peggy, he urged. They are already away from you, though it would be fairer to say you pushed them away yourself. It's done now. You'll have to come to terms with it. Let me explain how things will be, he added, knowing her reaction could help him share what he needed to next. Mandy and Todd are doing fine, he continued. In fact, they're handling this better than I am, he said honestly. They accepted that they would be living with me and that you wouldn't be there anymore. You've done such a good job of pushing them away for the past year that they weren't bothered by the thought of not seeing you, Peggy. You didn't expect it, but I did. No! Peggy cried. You can't do that. I already did, Kyle said simply. You already did. Now calm down and listen to what I'm going to tell you. He paused for a long moment. Are you ready? He asked. Don't I have any say in this? Peggy asked, sounding hurt. No, you don't, Kyle replied. For the first time in your life, all you can do is face the results of what you've done. What you've done to yourself, to your husband and kids, and to your marriage. Kyle took a deep breath. It's a shame, Peggy, he said softly. If you hadn't been so focused on getting back at me, we could have worked through almost anything. I was willing, but you chose this path. You just had to seek your revenge. And for what? Anne thought I was someone else one night when the light was dim. When she found out the truth, her reaction was quick. But you planned for a year and a half, deliberately looking for a way to betray me, and you succeeded. I've seen proof of what you did, Peggy. You let him take you outside in plain view? What were you thinking, letting that happen where anyone could see? You know I have proof of it all? Kyle paused. He had promised himself he wouldn't get upset, but his anger was close to overflowing. He needed to keep calm. Did you think I wouldn't know what you were planning, Peggy? He asked gently. You were practically glowing these last few weeks. I knew there was only one thing that would make you that excited. Everything you did, every smile, told me you were ready to act against me. It was so clear, Peggy. And didn't you know that credit card companies send out offers to their customers? You had the bills sent to the post office box thinking I wouldn't find out about it. But sometimes they send things to the home, too. I was aware of that new credit card almost as soon as you got it. He went quiet for a moment. Kyle, Peggy said carefully, I was wrong. Everything has fallen apart. I lost my job today. I don't know why. I know I've hurt you. I feel so foolish. Peggy, stop calling me baby and honey. You don't have the right to say those things to me. Not after what you've done, Kyle told her. He paused for a moment. I will agree with you. You've made some very poor choices, he added. I tried to tell you to let go of this need for revenge. I tried 100 times to explain it to you, but you wouldn't listen, he said with bitterness. You had to have it your way. And the reason you lost your job is up on the shelf, Peggy, he added. I sent Mr. Bruckmeister a picture. He feels the same way I do about employees who mislead their partners and use work trips for personal matters. The reason for your job loss might be framed differently, but the reality is that they don't trust you anymore, just like I don't. Peggy tried to understand what Kyle was saying. It was overwhelming. She decided to push aside her worries about work for now. Her marriage was much more important. Kyle, she said slowly, you wanted me to forgive you when you were with Anne. Can't we find a way to fix this? I would do anything to make it right. Please, can you forgive me? I'm truly sorry for how I've hurt you. Tears streamed down her face. Forgive? I don't have anything to forgive you for, Peggy, Kyle replied firmly. You've drained all the love I had for you. It's gone. Peggy started to cry harder. Kyle's tired tone felt permanent. She felt cold and scared sitting in the living room where they had shared so many evenings together. Do you not love me anymore? She sobbed. I still care for you. A little, Peggy, Kyle said honestly. Love doesn't just disappear without reason. But I'll learn, he insisted. It's tough, but I'll learn to not love you. This has been building up for a long time. I'm tired of how you tried to control me, the kids, and everyone around you, just to avoid giving more of yourself. I see some of your mother in that, Kyle reflected. From the time Mandy was born, and even more with Todd, I felt something was off. It seemed like you thought all you had to give me was a child or two, and once that was done, you pulled back. I don't know why, but you've been holding back your feelings for years. Kyle, that's not how I feel at all, Peggy cried. I've loved you since the first day I saw you. I can't imagine my life without you. Well, you might have to, Kyle replied firmly. I don't know how you changed, but ever since that incident, you've treated our marriage like a competition. You misled me to get what you wanted, and it seems like you've been dishonest about one thing or another since then. As I said, I believe your mother has influenced you, he continued. I know she thought I was unreasonable about the dress, but it wasn't just that. She often expressed her opinions fiercely. For her, winning arguments was crucial because of her views on traditional roles. There was a pause before Kyle added, I'm really tired. I'm sorry for talking about things that don't matter anymore, he said to her. Let me get back to the kids, Peggy, he said seriously. First, I'm not in Texas anymore. I'm going to be working out of state for a while, and I can't tell you where just yet. Maybe later. The TV stations can handle things without me for a bit. I've set things up well with them. Brad has my authority to take care of what needs to be done. Oh, and don't bother asking at my office because they don't know where I'll be either. The kids are doing fine. They've been having fun in the cab of this big rental truck I'm driving and playing travel games. Whenever we stop, they think it's great to have a swimming pool and a room where they don't have to clean up, as they said this evening. Awesome. So don't worry about them, Peggy. I miss them, Peggy said with tears in her voice. And they'll miss you too, Kyle said softly, even with the distance that has come between you and them this past year. But some things just have to happen. I'll fight you for them, Peggy said firmly. You can't keep my children from me. That brings us to the next point, Kyle said in a serious tone. He took a deep breath, and Peggy could hear it over the phone. I'm going to say this just once, Peggy. I'm filing for divorce. I'm offering you half of what we have built together, except you will not get anything from the trust fund my father left me. This means the house, the cars, our checking and savings accounts, and the debts, too. All of it will be shared equally. That's a fair deal, Peggy. I could probably ask for more. Now here's the thing. If you fight this divorce in any way, I will make sure any pictures taken by the private investigator in Orlando get shared with your family, our friends, and anyone you apply to for a job. Do you understand, Peggy? He paused for a long time. This felt like a threat. He knew it because Brad had warned him before about what he could do with the evidence they had. Kyle was doing this for his children, but he knew it wouldn't matter if he had to go to court. He realized he was doing something wrong, but he felt no respect for his wife anymore, and she didn't have any for him either. He didn't feel he owed her any kindness or respect. He would use the situation to get what he wanted and needed from her. He would live with his choices, whether right or wrong. Peggy cried until her eyes were red from wiping them. "You're a cruel man," she finally said. "I never knew you could do such a thing." "I didn't know you could turn against me for such a small reason, Peggy," he replied. "Cruel? Well, I learned that from you." "That's one more thing I need to thank you for, huh?" He paused, hoping for an answer, but all he heard was her crying. "Anyway, listen," he said. "About visiting the kids, here's the plan, Peggy. I won't keep them away from you any longer than I have to. I won't do that to them. What I will insist on is that you see a doctor right away and get checked for any health concerns." "I couldn't believe the pictures of you with that man. What were you thinking, Peggy? Were you going to bring something harmful home to me and the kids?" "He said he was fine," Peggy replied quietly. At the time, she hadn't really thought about the risks. "Of course he said that," Kyle said, his voice filled with sarcasm. "What else would he say? But you know what? He lied to his wife. He told her he was busy with work. She thought he was just tired when he got home each night. She didn't complain, but it sounds like she didn't want to be close to him either." Kyle let out a laugh that had no joy in it. "How does it feel to have upset 2 lives, Peggy?" he asked. "Oh, what did you do?" she gasped. "What do you think I did, Peggy? Did you really think I would let him go without facing some sort of consequence? You wore your wedding ring the whole time you were with him. It can be seen in almost every picture I have of you two together. He knew you were married and that you were off limits. Do you really think I would let someone like that get away with disrespecting our marriage? No way. He will have to deal with the fallout." Actually, his wife was quite thankful. From what I've learned from private investigators, she appreciated knowing what he was doing while he was with you. It seems she caught him in a similar situation a few months back. Kyle chuckled, though the humor was gone. "In fact," he said quietly, "she's been worrying about him. She told him to be careful because she's worried he might get into danger." Peggy went quiet. Her tears stopped as she took in what her husband said about Harold. An uneasy feeling weighed heavily in her stomach. "She's not going to sit back while he makes choices that affect her," Kyle continued. "She's going to end things with him and make sure she's okay," he said with satisfaction. Peggy felt too overwhelmed to say anything. It felt hard to swallow. "Anyway," he said after a moment, "I won't let you be around the kids if there's any chance they could be at risk. I won't worry about being polite when it comes to my children." "It's straightforward, Peggy. You won't see the kids until I have a doctor's approval." She nodded, knowing she had to say something. "Yes," she managed to say, her voice weak. "Good. If you don't challenge the divorce and I get the lab results showing everything is fine, you can visit the kids whenever you want," he explained. "Hold on. Let me be clear. Health problems can take time to appear. Dr. Miles says it could take about 6 months. So if in 6 months I get proof that everything is okay, then we can make plans," he continued. "I don't trust you, Peggy. That trust is gone, along with our respect. You will need to come to see us to visit the kids, and I'll always be close by. But this is your problem. You put yourself in this situation, and I won't feel sorry for you." "Kyle," she whispered. "What, Peggy?" "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Yeah, me too," he replied. At that moment, there was nothing more to say. "Well, I guess that's it for now," he said. "I'll call every now and then, and you can always reach me through Brad's office." He paused for a long time. "Goodbye," he said quietly. "Goodbye," she replied softly. Kyle ended the call before she could say anything else. "Hello? Peggy?" her mother asked with worry. "Why didn't you call me when you got home?" "Mom, everything is a mess," Peggy said, her voice shaky. She began to share her feelings. "Why, sweetheart, what's wrong?" Denise asked anxiously. "What has Kyle done now?" "It's not just what Kyle did," Peggy said. "Well, it is, but that's not the whole story." "What is it? Please tell me." "Mom, Kyle is divorcing me," Peggy admitted, letting herself feel the sadness for the first time. "What?" Denise gasped. "Who does he think he is?" "Don't worry, dear. We'll make sure he faces the consequences," she reassured her daughter. "Mom?" Peggy said hesitantly. She took a deep breath. It was better to say it now than later. "I was with someone in Orlando, and Kyle has pictures of it." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Well, Denise finally said. That doesn't change anything, honey. We will get through this. Mom, Peggy insisted, you don't understand. I was trying to get back at Kyle for the party, and now he's left me. I've lost him for good. He won't even let me see the kids until I see the doctor, she said softly. He can't do that, Denise exclaimed. Mom, I told you. He has pictures and videos, Peggy stressed. If I fight him for the kids, he'll share those all over town. You'll see them too, Mother. Do you want that? No, I didn't think so. The truth is, he has me trapped, and I can't do anything about it. I don't even know where he is. Denise was silent for a long time. I thought I was being clever, Peggy said sadly. I wanted to get back at him for what he did with Anne, and I wouldn't listen to him. I never did. I was too trusting to see it was just a mistake. And now I've lost him. Well, her mother said carefully, I don't think you were wrong, dear. Kyle should have understood you. He should have realized you couldn't let someone treat you like that. If he cared at all, he'd have noticed, she said firmly. Honey, your dad and I will help you as much as we can. You know that. We'll work this out. I promise, she reassured her. Peggy pulled the phone away from her ear and stared at it in disbelief for a moment. Mom, she finally replied, why don't you just stop? She pressed the off button. The sad woman threw the phone against the wall. She sat on the carpet and stared blankly out the patio door, thinking about how completely her life had fallen apart.